I'm Jordan, 28 male. I live in a modest two-bedroom apartment in the city, work as a financial analyst, and for the last decade I've been the designated responsible one in my family. I was the one who managed the numbers, tracked the savings, and always thought 10 steps ahead. It was that foresight, that responsibility, that led me to create a family fund meant to be our collective safety net. But it ended up funding the single greatest betrayal of my life. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The idea for the Family Legacy Fund, as my sister Jessica dramatically christened it, was born out of a crisis. 6 years ago, my dad, Frank, had a health scare that required emergency surgery. He was uninsured at the time and the bill was astronomical. We scraped by, borrowing from relatives and maxing out credit cards, but the stress of it all left a permanent mark on our family. I swore we would never be that vulnerable again. I was fresh out of college, just starting my career as a financial analyst, and I saw a clear path forward. I proposed a joint savings account. The rules were simple. Each working member of the family, me, my sister Jessica, her husband Derek, and my parents Frank and Helen, would contribute a set percentage of our monthly income. I would manage the investments to ensure it grew faster than a standard savings account. The money was strictly for emergencies, critical medical bills, catastrophic home repairs, or severe job loss. It was a pact, a promise we made to each other to have each other's backs. For a while, it worked beautifully. I set up automatic transfers and sent out quarterly reports, color-coded charts and all. My parents contributed what they could from their modest retirement income. Jessica, who owned a trendy but perpetually almost profitable boutique, and her husband Derek, a slick real estate agent, were less consistent. There were always excuses: a slow month at the shop, a commission that fell through, an unexpected networking expense. More often than not, I found myself covering their shortfall, depositing extra from my own paycheck to keep the fund on its growth trajectory. "Just until things pick up, Jordy," Jessica would say, her voice dripping with manufactured sweetness. "You're so good with money, we know you'll make it work." I let it slide because in my mind this was for the family. My success was their success and their security was my peace of mind. Over 6 years, through disciplined saving and shrewd investing on my part, the fund grew to just over $60,000. It was a substantial safety net, a source of immense pride for me. Around the time the fund was reaching its peak, my grandmother Clara's health began to decline. At 82, she was fiercely independent, a retired nurse who had spent her life caring for others. She still lived in the same small house she'd shared with my late grandfather, but a bout of pneumonia left her weak, and her doctor said she couldn't be left alone anymore. A family meeting was called at my parents' house. It felt more like a corporate boardroom, with Jessica and Derek sitting on one side of the dining table, radiating impatience. "She needs full-time care," my mom Helen said, wringing her hands. "A nursing home, the good ones are so expensive." Derek immediately pulled out his phone, tapping away. "The good ones are starting at $8 grand a month. We can't afford that." Jessica sighed dramatically. "Well, what are we supposed to do? I have the boutique to run, Derek has clients at all hours, and Mom and Dad are supposed to be enjoying their retirement." All eyes turned to me. I was single, lived alone, and had a stable job with some remote work flexibility. The unspoken suggestion hung heavy in the air. "I can help out," I said slowly. "Maybe I can stay with her a few nights a week, make sure she's taking her medication." Jessica seized the opening. "That's a great idea, Jordy. You're so good with her. Why don't you just move in with her for a little while? It would solve everything. We can all chip in for groceries and things, of course." The "of course" felt like an afterthought. Before I could process the magnitude of what they were asking, the decision was made. I was to become Grandma Clara's live-in caretaker. They framed it as a temporary solution, a noble sacrifice I was making for the family. It felt less like a choice and more like a sentence. The first few weeks were a blur of pill schedules, doctor's appointments, and learning the quiet rhythms of an elderly woman's life. It was exhausting. I'd work my demanding finance job from a makeshift desk in her guest room, then spend my evenings cooking, cleaning, and just keeping her company. She was a wonderful person, full of stories, but her mind was starting to fade. Some days she'd call me by my grandfather's name. Other days she'd stare out the window for hours, lost in a world I couldn't enter. My life shrank to the four walls of her house. My friends stopped calling, assuming I was too busy. My siblings and parents would call, but the conversations were always brief and superficial. "How's Grandma?" "Good," "Great," "Hey, gotta run," click. They never asked how I was doing. They never offered to take over for a weekend to give me a break. I was the solution to their problem, and as long as the problem was solved, they didn't need to think about the cost. One evening Jessica called. Her voice was giddy, bubbling with an excitement I hadn't heard in years. Guess what? Derek and I have been talking with Mom and Dad and we have the most amazing idea. She didn't wait for my response. We're going to Europe, all of us, a big family trip, 2 weeks. Italy, France, Spain, the works, we deserve a break, you know. It's been so stressful with Grandma and everything. I was speechless. A cold knot formed in my stomach. A trip now. How can you possibly afford that? I asked, my voice flat. She laughed, a light, airy sound that grated on my nerves. Oh, that's the best part. We were thinking, the Family Legacy Fund. I felt the blood drain from my face. Jess, no, that's not what the fund is for. It's for emergencies, real, life-altering emergencies. This is an emergency, she insisted, her voice rising. It's a mental health emergency. We are all so burnt out. We need to reconnect as a family, create memories. Isn't that what the fund is really for? The legacy part? Derek got on the line, his voice smooth and practiced like he was closing a deal. Look, Jordan, we see this as an investment in family wellness. The memories we'll make will be priceless. You've done such a great job growing that money, it's a shame to just let it sit there. Think of the stories we'll tell Grandma when we get back. They had an answer for everything. They had already convinced my parents, who were now dreaming of Tuscan wineries and Parisian cafes. I was the lone holdout, the killjoy standing in the way of their grand European adventure. I argued, I pleaded, I explained the concept of fiscal responsibility until I was blue in the face. It didn't matter. The vote was 4-1. Don't worry, Geordie, Jessica chirped before hanging up. You're doing such an important job with Grandma. We'll be sure to bring you back a souvenir. The line went dead, leaving me in the suffocating silence of my grandmother's house, the weight of their selfishness crushing me. The weeks leading up to their departure were a special kind of torture. The family group chat, once a quiet space for logistical updates, became a flurry of excitement. There were screenshots of flight confirmations, links to boutique hotels in Rome, and debates over which Michelin star restaurant to book in Paris. My mother would call me, her voice filled with a girlish excitement I hadn't heard since I was a child, to ask my opinion on travel insurance or the best way to pack for multiple climates. Each call was a dagger. She never seemed to notice the irony of asking me, the one being left behind, for travel advice. I was their planner, their financial engine, and now their convenient, forgotten caretaker. I went through the motions, offering numb, monosyllabic answers. Yes, that sounds nice. No, I don't think you need that many shoes. Have a great time. Each word tasted like ash. The day they were set to leave, they all came over to say goodbye to Clara. It was a performance. Jessica swept in, air-kissing our grandmother's wrinkled cheek, her expensive perfume filling the small, sterile-smelling room. We'll miss you so much, Grandma, she said, her voice an octave too high. But we'll be thinking of you. Derek clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture of faux camaraderie. Hold down the fort, champ, we're counting on you. My parents were the worst. My dad, Frank, avoided my eyes, muttering something about how they'd call from the airport. My mom hugged me, a quick, brittle embrace. You're a good son, Jordan, she whispered, as if that explained everything. As if that single sentence absolved them of their monumental selfishness. They saw my sacrifice not as a burden they had placed on me, but as a testament to my good character. It was a neat trick of self-delusion. Then came the moment that sealed my resentment in stone. My dad cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. Jordan will need you to authorize the transfer from the fund. You're the primary account holder, so the bank needs your final approval for a withdrawal that large. They had waited until the last possible second, standing there with their luggage practically in hand, to corner me. It was a power play, and we all knew it. Refusing now would mean a huge, ugly scene in front of our frail grandmother. I looked at their expectant faces, flushed with anticipation. For their trip of a lifetime, a trip funded by my discipline and paid for with my freedom. The fight had gone out of me. I felt a profound sense of exhaustion, a weariness that went bone deep. I pulled out my phone, navigated to the banking app, and with a few taps, I initiated the transfer of $58,000 to my father's account. I watched the balance of the Family Legacy Fund, my 6-year project, dwindle to almost nothing. The app flashed a confirmation message. Transfer successful. I looked up at them. It's done, I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Have a good trip. Jessica squealed with delight, and they were gone, a whirlwind of luggage and laughter, leaving me in a house that suddenly felt cavernous and silent. The silence was the worst part. For the first few days, it was deafening. The absence of their calls, their texts, their constant, low-level demands on my time and energy left a void. I moved through my days in a fog. I got Grandma Clara out of bed, made her breakfast, sorted her medications, and set up my laptop to work. The routine was my only anchor. I tried not to think about where they were. Were they tossing a coin in the Trevi fountain? Were they marveling at the art in the Louvre? Were they clinking glasses of champagne on a balcony overlooking the Amalfi Coast? The thoughts were intrusive, agonizing. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life while they were out living a vibrant, colorful existence that I had paid for. My resentment began to curdle, hardening from a dull ache into a sharp, burning anger. I had played by the rules. I had been responsible, dutiful, and selfless. And what had it got me? I was a prisoner in my grandmother's house, a glorified nursemaid, while my family gallivanted across Europe on my savings. About a week into their trip, a postcard arrived. It was a glossy picture of the Eiffel Tower at night. The back was covered in their scrawling handwriting. Bonjour from Paris, it began in Jessica's loopy script. It's even more magical than we imagined. The food is divine, the sights are breathtaking. Thinking of you and Grandma, wish you were here, love the family, wish you were here. The four most dishonest words ever written. They didn't wish I was there. They needed me to be exactly where I was, stuck in that quiet, lonely house so they could be free. I stared at the postcard, at the picture of the sparkling tower, a monument to a life I wasn't living. I felt something inside me snap. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a quiet, cold, and final severance of a bond I once thought was unbreakable. I dropped the postcard in the trash can next to a used tissue and a banana peel. That's what their empty sentiment was worth to me. In that moment, I stopped being their son, their brother, their champ. I was just a man who had been used and who was finally starting to get angry. The anger was a surprisingly clean fuel. It burned away the fog of resentment and left behind a sharp, focused clarity. My daily routine with Grandma Clara continued, but my internal world had shifted. I was no longer just a caretaker. I was an observer, a custodian of a life that was winding down, and my own life, which felt like it had been put on hold indefinitely. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, Grandma was napping, and the house was quieter than usual. I decided to tackle a project I'd been putting off, organizing the paperwork in her office. It was a small room smelling of old books and dust, crammed with a lifetime's worth of documents. My grandfather had been a meticulous record keeper, and she had kept everything. There were boxes of old tax returns, folders of ancient utility bills, and albums filled with fading black and white photographs. My family had told me to just shred the old stuff, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. It felt like erasing a history. I started with a large, dusty cardboard box labeled Cabin Papers. The cabin. It was the one piece of our family history that felt sacred. Tucked away on a lake in the mountains a few hours away, my grandfather had built it with his own two hands. It was rustic, smelled of pine and wood smoke, and was the backdrop to every happy memory from my childhood. Summers were spent fishing off the dock, autumns were for hiking through the brilliant foliage, and winters were for huddling by the massive stone fireplace. It was our family's soul, a shared sanctuary. In recent years, as my grandfather's health failed and now with my grandmother, the cabin had been used less. Jessica and Derek sometimes used it for weekend getaways with their friends, often leaving it a mess. They treated it like a free hotel, a backdrop for their social media posts. The thought now made my stomach clench. I opened the box. On top was a thick file folder. Inside were decades of property tax receipts, insurance documents, and maintenance records. I sifted through them, a nostalgic ache in my chest. I found a receipt for the well my GR. Grandfather had dug in 1978, a bill for the new roof from 1995. It was a paper trail of a life lived, of a place loved and cared for. I was about to close the folder when I noticed a different kind of document tucked at the very back. It was thicker, on heavy, legal-weight paper bound with a faded blue ribbon. It looked official and old. The title on the front read, Quitclaim Deed. My heart started to beat a little faster. I knew what a quitclaim deed was from my finance work. It's a legal instrument used to transfer interest in real property. I carefully untied the ribbon. The document was dated about 5 years ago, shortly after my grandfather passed away. It was a transfer of the cabin property. I scanned the legalese, my eyes searching for the names. The grantor was listed as Clara Miller, my grandmother. My breath caught in my throat when I saw the grantee section. It wasn't a transfer to all her children or to the family as a collective. There was only one name listed, mine, Jordan Miller. I read it again and then a third time, convinced my eyes were deceiving me. The document was signed by my grandmother, her familiar, slightly shaky signature at the bottom. It had been notarized, stamped, and looked completely official. Attached to it with a rusty paperclip was a small, handwritten note on her floral stationery. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. My dearest Jordan, the note began, if you are reading this, it means I am either gone or no longer clear of mind enough to tell you this myself. Your grandfather and I always knew the cabin would need a guardian, not just an owner. We saw how your sister and the others treated it as a convenience, a place to party. But you always understood its heart. You helped your grandfather chop the wood, you helped me patch the screens. You felt the peace of the place just like we did. We wanted to make sure it went to the one who would love it and protect it, who would see it as a legacy, not a commodity. This cabin is yours. It was our sanctuary, and now I hope it can be yours. Don't let them take this from you. Your loving Grandma Clara. I sat there on the dusty floor of her office, the deed in one hand and the note in the other, and I felt the world tilt on its axis. A wave of emotions washed over me, shock, confusion, and a profound, bone-deep gratitude that brought tears to my eyes. My grandmother, in her quiet, unassuming way, had seen everything. She had seen my sister's carelessness, my parents' passivity, and my own quiet love for the one place that truly felt like home. She had seen who I was, not just what I could do for the family. She had given me a gift of immense value, not just financially, but emotionally. This wasn't just a property, it was validation. It was the ultimate expression of love and trust from the person I was sacrificing everything for. For a moment, I felt a surge of guilt. She had left it only to me. What would the family say? The guilt was quickly extinguished by a cold, hard thought. What family? The one that was currently sipping wine in Tuscany, spending the money I had painstakingly saved without a second thought for me or the elderly woman they left in my care. The one who saw me as a tool, a convenience, a solution. No, my grandmother's words echoed in my head. Don't let them take this from you. I looked at the deed again, the legal binding proof of her wishes. A new feeling began to bloom in my chest, pushing aside the anger and resentment. It was a sense of power. They had taken my money, my time, and my freedom. They had left me with nothing but responsibility, but my grandmother had left me with everything that mattered. She had left me the cabin. And in that moment, sitting on that dusty floor, I knew I would honor her wish. I would not let them take it from me. The deed felt like a hot coal in my hands. It was one thing to find a document in a box. It was another entirely for it to be legally binding and officially recorded. My mind, trained to analyze and verify, immediately kicked into gear. A notarized signature was a good sign, but the crucial step was whether the deed had been recorded with the county clerk's office where the cabin was located. An unrecorded deed is like a whisper. A recorded one is a shout that the whole world can hear, a public and permanent record of ownership. I needed to know which one I was holding. The next morning, I made arrangements for a trusted neighbor to sit with Grandma Clara for a few hours. I told her I had an urgent appointment, which wasn't a lie. I drove to the county courthouse, a stately old building 2 hours away, my grandmother's letter tucked safely in my pocket. I reread it at every stoplight, her words reinforcing my resolve. Walking into the county clerk's office of records felt like stepping into another era. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and the quiet hum of fluorescent lights. I approached the counter, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs. I explained to the clerk, a kind-faced woman with reading glasses perched on her nose, that I was trying to verify the ownership of a property. I gave her the cabin's address and the parcel number, which I had carefully copied from the deed. She typed the information into her computer, her fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced ease. She squinted at the screen, humming thoughtfully. "Miller property up on Heron Lake," she said, more to herself than to me. "Yep, here we go." She turned the monitor towards me. "See here, the last recorded transfer was 5 years ago, a quitclaim deed." Breath hitched. "Can you tell me the names on that transfer?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She clicked a few more times. "Looks like it was transferred from Clara Miller to Jordan Miller." She looked up at me over her glasses. "Is that you?" I could only nod, a wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled my knees. It was real, it was official. My grandmother hadn't just signed a piece of paper. She had gone through the entire legal process to ensure the transfer was ironclad. She had done it quietly, secretly, without telling anyone, protecting her decision from the inevitable family drama. The clerk printed out a certified copy of the recorded deed for me. Holding it felt different from holding the original. This document was proof. It was my shield. It was my weapon. On the drive back, a plan began to form in my mind, a cold and intricate piece of machinery. My first call was to a lawyer. I found a highly rated real estate attorney in the area and scheduled a consultation for the following day. I needed to understand my exact rights and the best way to enforce them. I met with Mr. Davison, a sharp, no-nonsense man in his late 50s. I laid out the whole story, the family fund, the vacation, my role as caretaker, and the discovery of the deed. I showed him the certified copy and my grandmother's letter. He read everything carefully, his expression unreadable. When he finally looked up, he gave a low whistle. "Well, Mr. Miller," he said, a slight smile playing on his lips. "Legally, your position is airtight. The property is 100% yours. Your family has no claim to it whatsoever. They are, for all legal intents and purposes, guests, and only with your permission." He then laid out the steps I needed to take. "First," he said, "we change the locks immediately. We'll hire a locksmith to go up there tomorrow." This was a crucial step to establishing control. "Second, we post no trespassing signs on the property. It makes your position legally unambiguous." He then moved on to the more strategic elements. "Your family is currently out of the country, which is a gift. It gives you time to get everything in order without interference. When they return, they will likely try to go to the cabin. That's when they'll discover the new reality." We discussed the utilities, which were still in my grandmother's name. He advised me to have them transferred to my name immediately. This would be another layer of undisputed ownership. If they tried to challenge me, they would face a mountain of evidence, a recorded deed, new locks to which only I had the key, and utility bills in my name. Mr. Davison also gave me a piece of advice that went beyond the legal. Your family is going to explode, he said, his gaze steady. They will guilt-trip you, threaten you, and try to manipulate you. They will paint you as the villain. You need to be prepared for that. Your grandmother's letter is your emotional anchor. Hold on to it. This isn't just about a piece of property. It's about respecting her final wish. I left his office feeling empowered. The path forward was clear, a series of logical, defensible actions. The anger and hurt I had been carrying for weeks had been transformed into a cold, hard resolve. This wasn't just revenge, it was justice. It was about honoring the one person in my family who had truly seen me, who had trusted me to be the guardian of our family's most precious legacy. The rest of them, they had made their choice when they boarded that plane. They had chosen a fleeting, 2-week luxury over a lifetime of loyalty. They just didn't know the full price of their ticket yet, but they would soon. The next 2 weeks were a blur of methodical action. While my family was posting smiling selfies from the Spanish coast, I was quietly dismantling their world. Following Mr. Davison's advice, my first priority was the cabin. I hired a locksmith from a town near the lake and drove up to meet him on a crisp autumn morning. The 2-hour drive was therapeutic. The further I got from the city and the suffocating atmosphere of my grandmother's house, the clearer my head became. Arriving at the cabin felt like coming home. The familiar scent of pine needles and damp earth was a balm to my soul. It looked exactly as I remembered, a sturdy log structure nestled amongst the trees. Overlooking the calm, gray water of the lake. The locksmith, a burly man named Gus, was efficient and discreet. He didn't ask any questions as he expertly replaced every lock on the property, the front door, the back door, the woodshed, and the old boathouse. He handed me a set of new gleaming keys. She's all yours, he said with a gruff smile. Holding those keys felt like holding the keys to my own future. I walked through the cabin, my footsteps echoing in the silence. It was mine. Truly and completely mine. Before leaving, I posted the no trespassing signs Mr. Davison had recommended. I nailed them to trees at the entrance to the long, gravel driveway and on the gate post. They were stark and official with bold black letters against a white background. Private property, no trespassing, violators will be prosecuted. It felt aggressive, final. It was a declaration of sovereignty. My next calls were to the utility companies. The electricity, the propane supplier for the heating, the small local telephone company. One by one, I transferred the accounts from my grandmother's name to mine. Each conversation was a small victory, another brick in the wall I was building around my inheritance. I provided copies of the deed, answered security questions, and by the end of the day, every bill associated with the cabin would be coming to me, addressed to me. I was the master of the estate in every legal and practical sense. Back at Grandma Clara's house, I continued my care for her, but with a lighter heart. Knowing what she had done for me, knowing the secret we now shared, even if she was no longer aware of it, changed the nature of my duties. It was no longer a burden, it was an honor. I felt a renewed sense of connection to her, a deep and abiding love that transcended the daily toil of her care. While she slept, I prepared for the final phase of my plan, the bait. My sister Jessica had always talked about throwing a huge end-of-summer party at the cabin during the first weekend of October. It was her annual tradition, a way to show off to her friends. In the past, I'd always gone up a few days early to help her clean and prepare. She treated my help as a given, an expected service. I knew with absolute certainty that her plan for this year would be no different. She would assume, as she always had, that the cabin was there for her use, and that I would be there to facilitate it. I opened my calendar and circled Saturday, October 4th. That would be the day. Their flight was scheduled to land on the 29th of September. That gave them a few days to get over their jet lag before they would inevitably start planning their triumphant return to what they considered their personal party house. My plan was simple. I was going to do nothing. I wasn't going to call them, text them, or respond to their inevitable messages about the party. I would let them make their plans, invite their guests, buy their supplies, and make the 2-hour drive up to the mountains. I would let them arrive, full of suntanned arrogance and vacation stories, at the foot of the driveway. And there they would find a locked gate, no trespassing signs, and a reality that had been fundamentally, irrevocably altered while they were away. It was a passive-aggressive masterpiece, a trap built not with steel and wire but with their own entitlement and assumptions. Their arrogance was the bait and their shock would be my reward. The thought of it brought a cold smile to my face. I imagined Jessica, in her designer jeans and overpriced sunglasses, pulling on the heavy chain that would be wrapped around the gate, her confusion turning to indignation. I imagined Derek, her slick husband, making frantic calls, his manufactured charm failing him for the first time. I imagined my parents, confused and flustered, wondering what on earth was going on. For all the years they had taken me for granted, for all the times they had overlooked my contributions and amplified my responsibilities, this silence, this locked gate would be my answer. It would be a response so loud and definitive that they would never be able to ignore it. The trap was set. All I had to do now was wait for them to come home and walk right into it. The homecoming was exactly as I'd pictured. They called me from the airport, their voices still buzzing with the energy of their trip. "We're back," Jessica sang into the phone. "Oh, Jordan, you have no idea what you missed. Italy was a dream." She launched into a breathless monologue about ancient ruins and handmade pasta, completely oblivious to my clipped one-word responses. There was no "thank you for taking care of Grandma," no "how did things go while we were away." It was as if the last 2 weeks of my life, the weeks they had stolen from me, simply hadn't happened. They had stepped out of reality for a fortnight and expected the world to have remained perfectly still, waiting for their return. "Anyway," she said finally, pausing for a breath, "the end of summer party is on for this Saturday. I've already sent out the evites. It's going to be epic. Can you head up to the cabin on Friday to open it up and air it out? The usual." The casualness of her command was staggering. The usual, my unpaid, unappreciated labor was the usual. This was the moment, the first test of my resolve. I had rehearsed this in my head 100 times. I simply said, "I can't, I'm busy." The silence on the other end of the line was thick with confusion. "Busy," Jessica repeated as if the word were a foreign language. "Busy with what, Geordie? This is the party of the year. My friends are counting on it." "I have other plans," I said, my voice calm and even. "You'll have to figure it out yourself." I could hear Derek muttering in the background. Jessica's voice turned sharp. "What is your problem? Fine, whatever, we'll handle it. Don't expect an invitation." She hung up. I knew this was just the beginning. They were annoyed, but the true scope of the situation hadn't even begun to dawn on them. Saturday arrived, a perfect, crisp autumn day. I spent the morning with Grandma Clara, reading to her by the window. My phone remained silent until around 1 p.m. It was Jessica. I ignored the call. A minute later, a text message appeared. "Jordan, where's the spare key? The one that's usually under the fake rock is gone." I smiled. The fake rock was in the trunk of my car. I let the message sit unanswered. 5 minutes later, another text. "This isn't funny. We're at the gate. It's locked." "Did you do this?" My phone rang again. This time it was my dad, Frank. I ignored it. Then my mom, Helen, ignored. Then Derek, ignored. A barrage of texts followed, each more frantic than the last. "Jessica, answer your phone. There are no trespassing signs everywhere. What is going on?" "Derek, mate, call me. We have 2 carloads of people here and a trunk full of groceries. This is not cool." "Mom, Jordan, honey, please call me. We're all very worried. Is something wrong with the cabin?" "Dad, Jordan, call me now." The symphony of their panic was music to my ears. I let them stew for a full hour. I pictured them standing at the foot of the driveway, their party guests milling about awkwardly, the celebratory mood souring with every passing minute. Finally, I decided it was time. I sent a single message to the family group chat, the same one they had used to plan their European getaway. My message was simple: the cabin is private property. It is not available for your party. Please vacate the premises. The explosion was instantaneous. My phone began to vibrate so violently it nearly fell off the table. They were all calling me at once. I answered the call from my father. "What is the meaning of this, Jordan?" he boomed, his voice tight with fury. "Private property? It's the family cabin." "No, it's not," I replied calmly. "It's my cabin." I could hear Jessica screaming in the background. "He's lying. He's lost his mind." "I have the deed, Dad," I continued, my voice steady. "Grandma Clara signed the property over to me 5 years ago. It's recorded with the county. It is legally and in every other way mine. You are all trespassing." The silence that followed was profound. I had dropped a bomb and I could almost feel the shockwave traveling through the phone line. That's not possible," my mother stammered, having clearly grabbed the phone from my dad. "Clara would have told us. Why would she do that?" "Perhaps you should ask yourselves that question," I said, the ice in my voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Perhaps she left it to the one person she knew would actually take care of it, and the one person she knew would actually take care of her. I have to go now. I need to give Grandma her lunch." I hung up the phone. I turned it on silent and put it in a drawer. The rest of the day was peaceful. The house was quiet. I knew a storm was raging 2 hours away, but in my small corner of the world there was only calm. They had arrived with their suntanned lies about wishing I was there and their casual, entitled expectations. They had been met with a locked gate and a hard truth. Their party was ruined. Their assumptions were shattered. And my new life, a life where I was no longer their doormat, had just begun. The days that followed the disastrous party attempt were characterized by a deafening silence. After the initial flurry of rage-filled calls and texts on that Saturday, my phone went quiet. It was a calculated silence, I was sure. They were regrouping, trying to figure out their next move. They were likely talking to each other, validating their own sense of victimhood, painting me as the ungrateful, mentally unstable villain who had stolen their birthright. I imagined the conversations. Jessica weeping about her social humiliation, Derek posturing about legal action, my parents wringing their hands and wondering where they went wrong, conveniently forgetting every decision that had led us to this point. I didn't care. The silence was a gift. It was the space I needed to breathe, to think, and to solidify my new reality. About a week later, my father appeared at my grandmother's front door. He looked older, tired. The confident swagger from the airport was gone, replaced by a weary slump in his shoulders. I let him in and we sat in the formal living room, a space reserved for difficult conversations. "Jordan," he began, foregoing any pleasantries. "We need to talk about the cabin. Your mother is a wreck. Jessica isn't speaking to us. You've torn this family apart." He was using the classic manipulator's handbook, blame the victim. "I didn't tear this family apart," I said, my voice low and steady. "I just locked a gate. You all took a vacation on money meant for emergencies, leaving me to care for grandma alone. You drained our collective safety net for your own pleasure. That's what tore this family apart. The cabin is just where you finally noticed the damage." He sighed, running a hand over his face. "It was a mistake, son. We were stressed. We weren't thinking clearly." "You were thinking perfectly clearly," I countered. "You thought I would just fall in line as always. You thought I'd cover for you as always. You thought the cabin would be there for you as always. Your problem isn't that you weren't thinking, it's that for the first time your assumptions were wrong." He tried a different tack, appealing to my sense of fairness. "But for Clara to leave it only to you. It's not fair to Jessica. The cabin should be for everyone." "Grandma didn't think so," I said, pulling a folded piece of paper from my pocket. It was a copy of her letter. I handed it to him. "She wrote this, read it." I watched his face as he read her familiar, looping handwriting. I saw his eyes scan the words. "We saw how your sister and the others treated it as a convenience. We wanted to make sure it went to the one who would love it and protect it. Don't let them take this from you." His expression shifted from anger to something that looked like shame. He read it twice, then slowly folded it and handed it back to me. He had no argument against his own mother's words. I I didn't know," he whispered. "Of course you didn't," I said, the last bit of my anger melting away, replaced by a sad sense of pity. "You never looked closely enough to see." He left shortly after that. There were no more arguments, no more demands. The fight had gone out of him. That was the last real conversation I had with any of them. Jessica and Derek cut off all contact, blocking my number and unfriending me on social media. My parents would occasionally send stilted formal texts asking about Clara's health, but the warmth was gone. The bridge had been burned and I found I had no interest in rebuilding it. My life became simpler, quieter. My focus was on my grandmother and my work. A few months later, Clara passed away peacefully in her sleep. I was holding her hand. My family came to the funeral, of course. We stood on opposite sides of the grave, a chasm of unspoken words between us. They were polite, distant strangers. After she was gone, I sold her house and used the money, along with the small amount left in the original fund, to buy a small place of my own, closer to the mountains. The cabin became my true home, my sanctuary. I spent my weekends there, chopping wood, patching the roof, and fishing off the dock, just as I had with my grandfather. The echoes of my happy childhood were there, but they were joined by a new sense of peace, a quiet solitude that was entirely my own. I honored my grandmother's wish. I became the cabin's guardian. I protected it, and in turn it protected me. It gave me a place to heal, to redefine myself not as someone's son or brother, but as my own man. Sometimes when the wind blows through the pine trees, it sounds like a whisper. And I know with a certainty that settles deep in my bones that I made the right choice. My phone is silent, but the woods are full of life. I am finally truly at peace.